Welcome to the video tutorial for the Rusper Blouse. We're going to start by doing the pin hem on our sleeve opening. This is my sleeve pattern. Cut one pair, note the notches, double on the back sleeve, single on the front sleeve, and we've got little ones just here and in the centre, which I'm going to show you now. These little centre ones here, this is where we're going to do a little pin hem. It's about 5 centimetres this opening, so I'm just going to turn and turn. You've got a centimetre seam allowance on there. I've taken it ever so slightly less, but you've got up to a centimetre. So we've just turned the hem twice onto the wrong side of the sleeve, and I'm just going to stitch that up. Okay, there's your little baby hem. Do that on the other sleeve too. So next we're going to seam the sleeve. Here's my sleeve. You can see I've just snipped into that so that my centimetre seam allowance is free either side of my baby hem. So right sides together, put the underarm seam together, back tack to start, back tack to finish, centimetre seam allowance. There we go, job done. I'm going to overlock mine. You could zigzag it or finish it in however you prefer to finish your seam edges. Now I'm just going to press that seam towards the back sleeve. There we go, nicely pressed. Repeat for the other sleeve. So next we're going to put the gathering threads in on our cuff. So here's my sleeve again, there's my baby hem. So I'm going to start with this overhanging centimetre seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch on a number 5 stitch, 2 rows of stitching around the cuff, and I'm starting at my baby hem and I'll be finishing at that overhang of seam allowance on the other side of the baby hem. So the first row of stitching is a centimetre from the edge, and then I'd put a second one in which is halfway between the raw edge and the one that I've just stitched, so it's about 5 millimetres in. There we go for the second one. Don't worry if they're a bit wobbly, you can always take them out when you're finished if you want to. There we go, 2 rows of stitches ready for gathering. Now we're going to prep the sleeve tie. So we've got a pair of these, or 2, cut to fold, and you need these notches here. Okay, so let's take one away and we'll start with this one. I'm going to bag the ends of my tie out before I apply it. You can apply it and then bag the ends out. It's entirely up to you. I'm just doing it this way today. So I'm going to match those notches and lay the raw edges together. I'm going to back tack from the notch and stitch all the way around to the end. And do the same on the other side. Centimetre seam allowance as usual. And there we go. So there's both our ends stitched there. And you can see it's still open in the middle where I can gather my sleeve into. I'm going to snip the ends and just clip into that curve there every so often. I'm not going to trim the seam allowance down because it's such a beautifully fine Indian cotton that I'm using. It's light as a feather, there's nothing there, so I don't need to do that. If you were using something a bit more bulky, or if it was a broderie or something that had a little bit more of a chunky stitch on it, you might want to. I'm poking mine through with my scissors in a very dangerous fashion because I've lost my plastic pokey through thing, but I'd suggest use a knitting needle or something that's not quite as sharp on the end, but I'm living dangerously today. There we go, just tease the end out there. And then I'm just going to roll that seam out so that the fabric is at its fullest, and then give it a nice press. There we go, one pressed cuff tie. Okay, so now we're going to put the sleeve tie onto the sleeve. Here's my sleeve, here's my tie. You can see I snipped into that seam allowance again so that it's freed up my centimetre. And I'm starting by placing my tie to the wrong side of my sleeve. I tend to do this bit back to front to most people because I find it gives a nice clean finish on the front of the sleeve, which is just much easier to achieve this way. But obviously you do the way you find easiest. So I'm just pinning the end of my tie to the end of my baby hem seam allowance. This is the middle of my tie. You can just fold your tie in half and find that point which matches your underarm seam. There's a little notch on there as well. That was just to show you or remind you that you need to leave a little flat bit under your arm. You don't want gathers under your arm. You want the fullness of the sleeve ideally at the front and the back. So I put them there as a reminder to start your gathers around 3 centimetres from your underarm seam. So I'm continuing to pin now. I've got my centimetre seam allowance there and the end of my tie, and I'm just going to pin that. Okay, so we've got our anchor points in. I'm just going to pop these ties in so that I don't catch them when I'm stitching, and I'm going to pull up these gather threads now. You want to make sure the sleeve is the same length as your tie. That one's caught in there. Okay, just need a pin to free that one up. That's it. So I'm just pulling these threads up until the outer sleeve is gathered to be the same length as the tie. Just pull it through. Again, don't let any of those gathers escape into your little flat area. Okay, so I'm going to pin that together. I will even out all my gathers as I stitch anyway, so it's just easier to do it as you go. But as long as the two pieces are the same length, then that's the main issue at this point. So that's one side, and you just need to do the same on the other side. Okay, I'll pop some pins in, and then we're going to start stitching from the end of that baby hem all the way around to the other end. Just checking that that's all the same length. Yeah, that fits nicely. So from here, back tack, centimetre seam allowance all the way around, and then back tack to finish at the other end of the baby hem. So here we go. I'll be taking this quite slowly because I want to even out my pleats as I go. I'm stitching directly on the gathering stitch that I put in that was a centimetre from the raw edge. Some people like to put 3 rows of gathers in, which I think it probably is faster in a way because you don't have to titivate quite as much, and gives you a lovely neat gather. But I find stitching directly on that gathering thread is good enough for me. Okay, so we've gone all the way around and stitched our tie onto our sleeve, adjusting our gathers. Now we're going to fold the other edge of our tie in a centimetre and pin it to the stitch line that we've just stitched. You could press your seam allowance down first so that you've got it nice and even. So I'm literally just, that folded edge is against that stitch line that we've just done. Working my way around the cuff, tucking it in and pinning. So let's just check this edge. Tuck those bits in there, make it all neat. Last pin. Okay, so now we're ready to stitch. So I'm going to back tack again to start, and I'm just going to stitch very close to that edge, just like a millimetre in. Okay, so back tack to start, and again, not going too fast. You could always tack this first if you think it would help, so that you don't end up with it gaping or missing anywhere. Try and keep my hands out the way so that you can see. There we go. Okay, so that's our tie on. You can see I've stitched it quite close to the edge there. You could hand stitch that if you're not so confident. And then you've just got this little bit to tie here. You could make this longer if you like a big floopy tie. I thought it would look quite nice as a little neat bow. So now we're going to stitch the fronts together. Here's my front pattern. You need one pair. Got a notch at the front here, one for underarm to put your sleeve in, one at the side. So here are my two pieces. I did try and sort of pattern match them. Not always an easy job on hand block printed Indian cotton, but I think I've done an okay job. So right sides together. Now you've got that notch on your centre front, so I'm going to stitch from there down towards the hem. So back tack to start, stitch down 1 centimetre seam allowance, back tack to finish. Here we go. That's my first seam done. Now I'm going to overlock this edge, and again just from my notch downwards. There we go, nice bit of overlocking. So I'll open that up and press it to one side. There we go. Next, I'm going to do a baby hem like I did on my cuff edge. So just turn and turn. I'm going to give that a little press before I stitch it. And I'm just going to stitch down on the edge. At the bottom there, I'm going to just back tack to strengthen it a little bit more. It doesn't have a lot of tension on it, so it should be fine, but it will just help, I think, give the garment some longevity. So stitching on the edge of my little hem there until I get down to the bottom. I'm going to put my needle in, pivot my foot, lay my seam flat. You could do a bar tack down here if you've got a machine that does a bar tack, or you could do like a really close together tiny zigzag like for a buttonhole stitch. I've just used a small stitch on my machine, and I'm just going backwards and forwards a little bit. There we go, just adds a little bit of something. So needle in, foot up, pivot your fabric again, and off we go just to secure that baby hem the other side. So there we go, that's our little front opening there, all done. Next job is the side seams. So here's my back panel, cut one to fold, got your notches for your sleeve there, side seams notch there. Let's open this out. This is one piece because it's cut to the fold. Okay, so right sides together. This is my front. Make sure I've got them the right way up. Okay, so a couple of pins into the side seam, be stitching from the armhole down towards the hem. So centimetre seam allowance, back tack to start, back tack to finish. Okay, there's my side seam. I'm going to overlock to finish that edge. Looks nice and neat. Then I'm going to open that up and I'm going to press that seam towards the back. There we go, both side seams done. That's the main body of our blouse done. Next job is inserting the sleeves. So here's my bodice, here's my sleeve with my bow. Okay, so let's find some notches. Oh, there's a single notch, that's the front of my sleeve. And let's check, there should be a double one on here. When it's a pattern, it's not easy to see. There we go, there's my double. So that sleeve goes this side. And I'm going to match the underarm seams to start with. So lay those on top of each other. As this is a raglan sleeve, it's a really simple to pin and sew. Here we go. So we start at the neckline at the top there. Those angles of the fabric should match at the top. And then just pin down the rest of your armhole. And then the other side. Find the tops. There we go. That's the top of my sleeve, the top of my neckline. Pin those together. Again, the angles should match beautifully. And just pin the rest of your armhole. Okay, so we're going to go end to end. Start here, back tack, stitch all the way around, centimetre seam allowance and back tack to finish. Here we go. Okay, so that's our seam done around our armhole. Have a little check, make sure there's no tucks. And I'm going to overlock the edge. You could do beautiful French seams on this, it would be nice and simple to do that. And then I'm going to press this seam towards the sleeve, but I'm only going to press sort of the front and the back. I'm not going to worry about under the arm. There we go, one sleeve. Next we're going to do the neck gathering threads. So this is exactly the same as you did on your cuffs just now. So starting at the centre front opening, stitching all the way around to the other one. So 1 centimetre away from the edge, 1/2 a centimetre away from the edge on a size 5 stitch. Job done. Now we're going to prep the necktie. This is pretty much exactly the same process as we did for the sleeve ties. So it's cut 1 to fold, obviously it's longer. I've popped a little snip in there, a little notch to mark the centre back, which is on the fold. Then you've got these other notches, which are super important. So this one is one sleeve seam, this is the other sleeve seam, and this is the centre front. So make sure you've marked those appropriately for the size you've cut out. Then we're just going to open it up, fold it in half right sides together, and stitch the ends to that from that first notch, like we did with the cuffs. Exactly the same. So back tack, centimetre seam allowance, stitching all the way around the curvy bit. Do exactly the same for the other end. So there we go, turn through and press, snip your edges. Fabulous. So that's what it should look like. Now we're going to apply the necktie. So here's my blouse. Here's my necktie. You can see I've pressed up the seam allowance on one side already just because it's a longer area than the sleeve ties were. So fold it in half and find your centre back if you haven't marked it already, and again with your centre back neckline of your blouse do the same, fold it in half, find the centre point and pop those together. So I'm putting my necktie to the wrong side of my neckline again because I do it all back to front. So I'm going to pop a pin in there to start with. So I'm starting at the centre back and I'm going to work out towards my centre front. So first notch, find the sleeve seam, pop those together, pop a pin in. Next notch, there it is, find the other sleeve seam, just work your way across, there it is, pop those together, grab a pin, anchor those together. Then the last notch or the end of your tie, which is here, I'm just going to free up that seam allowance again, grab my scissors, so literally just snipping in to that stitch line, and let's do the same on the other side. So just get into that stitch there we go. Now it's clear where it starts and finishes, and I'm just butting those edges together and pop the last pin in. So now this is now exactly the same as you did for your sleeve tie, and you're just going to pull up your gathering threads and make sure that the blouse gathers are the same length as your tie. Incidentally, you can cut your necktie on the cross, which in some ways is much nicer to wear, but it is more tricky to apply. Hence, I've done it on the straight because I felt in the spirit of a beginner pattern, this is a much simpler, much easier way to do it. You'll get a much better result. So we're pulling those gather threads up. Don't dislodge your pins. And just distribute your gathers as evenly as possible until the blouse is the same length as your tie. Just popping in a few extra pins there as I go. There we go. Definitely worth spending a little bit of time again adjusting your gathers here. Okay, so that's one half of your neckline pinned. So you just need to do exactly the same now for the other side. So now we've pinned it all, we're going to start at the centre front, back tack to start. I'm just going to even out my gathers as I go. Like I said, take a little bit of time over this. It's worth it. You get a much nicer gather if you just take a little bit of time. Work your way around from one end of the tie to the other. There we go. Now you can see this really looks like a blouse. Take out any pins that are left. And the last step is, again, I usually start from the centre back. Is now you've got that already pressed edge to fold down as you go, and just pin, match that folded edge to the stitch line that you've just sewn, and work your way out from your centre back neck to your shoulder and then to your centre front. Again, you could tack this down. It's quite a long area this time. Your cuff was shorter, but if you're worried about things creeping, it's always worth taking a little bit of time just to put a tacking stitch in. Okay, last pin going in. Fab. So again, stitching quite close to the edge here. I'm just going to start at one end, back tack to start, and I'm just ever so carefully working my way across. Got lots of stray threads. I shall tidy it all up in a little while. I don't like to remove my gathering threads until I'm absolutely confident it's all gone together beautifully, because it's a real pain if you've pulled them out and something's wrong. So here we go. All stitched down, all neat, just needs a little press now. There we go, nicely pressed. Nearly finished. Right, last step. Here's my blouse. You can see my neckline. I've given it a nice press. And the hem, I'm going to buck my usual trend. As this is such a beautiful light cotton, I'm going to turn my hem and stitch right on the edge, so it won't cause any hard edges or anything or marks under your clothes, because it's so floaty light. Given that a press, fabulous, we're done. So we have a tie neckline that we've done, some gathers in the shoulders, we've got our beautiful sleeves with our lovely little bows, and we've got a hem. I hope your blouse looks something like this. Enjoy.